And even the diagnosis anorexia is really a disease of the mind. And, from our previous conversations, I learned that your mom also suffered from a mental condition, which was bipolar, which, and she kind of suffered in silence when I've heard you talk to others about it also. So many people have no idea what it's like to live with someone who's suffering from from a disease like that. So have you ever imagined what your life would be, what your mom's life would be like if she knew about low carb, rather at a young age, which is what your book's trying to do, or at any age? How, when you reflect on that, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be so different. We have such good evidence now, especially with the recent pilot study on bipolar disorder and ketogenic diets, just
Mhm.
that people with certain mental disorders, whether that's bipolar disorder, major depression, schizophrenia, are doing really well when they
Yeah,
eat low carb. And, the hypothesis being that the ketones just cross the blood-brain barrier very easily and
right.
allows their brains to function. And we have similar, that's similar with eating disorders. Like the people with eating disorders just may not metabolize glucose very well in the brain. I mean, you combine that fact with the fact that they're fed the standard American diet, which is just loaded with sugars and carbohydrates.
Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. The moment I held my two children was one of the most memorable moments in my life. It was a moment filled with emotion and a moment that began a bond that can never be broken. In that moment, it was clear that I wanted to prioritize their well being and to keep them safe and make sure I provided the best path for them to live a long, healthy, and high quality life. But being a parent can be complex, and oftentimes the best way to keep them healthy is not always clear. But today I have some good news, guys. We now have a clear understanding about nutrition that has provided some much needed clarity on how our children need to eat to be healthy. And what's even better is that now we have a resource that can directly speak to our children about the importance of nutrition. That resource is a book written by today's guest, which will be the focus of today's conversation. That book is entitled The Fox Family Food Fight, written by Michelle Hearn. And as you might can imagine, that title sounds like a book that's written for children as we discuss the Fox family today. Michelle also gave me the privilege of writing my thoughts about her book, and I wanted to kind of begin today's episode sharing what I had to say uh, in her book. Providing a path for our children to achieve metabolic health through lifestyle changes is best done if we can engage them at a very young age and through their imagination to overcome the many barriers that have limited our ability to get the message out that food is medicine. We also need to reach young folk, and why not do that via a story? When repeated, that will likely inspire their friends, siblings, and parents to question what they are eating, hopefully culminating in more thoughtful decision making around the food they choose to put in their mouths. So I really thank Michelle for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on her wonderful book. But just as importantly, I want to make sure you get to know her better during today's conversation. So if you haven't heard of Michelle Hearn, she graduated from Kansas State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Nutrition and Dietetics. That was in 2007. Completed her internship at Oregon Health and Science University in 2009 and became a registered dietitian. For the last 15 years or so, she's led a dietitian clinic, acute care related clinic, psychiatric care, and long term care facility focused on diabetes and obesity. In 2019, she decided to go crazy and adopt a low carb, high fat, animal based diet, but she did that to heal. And thankfully, this is not her first book. Her first book is called Dietitian's Dilemma because it is a dilemma when a dietitian uh, adopts a diet that's not traditional in her training. And I'm just grateful that she's also written this other book, which is focused on our children. So, Michelle, thank you so much for coming to the second invite to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hampton, so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. Thank you. And before we begin, I do want to also celebrate the fact that uh, the the society that is now being formed, focused on diabetes. You'll be part of that. I'll be part of that, and others. And I just want to thank you also for being part of that, because I think this message that we need to teach to people with the American Diabetes Society is going to be primarily driven by nutrition. And although I have a master's in nutrition, I need nutrition professionals like you on the team to really provide clarity and to remind people that nutrition is the best way to heal. So thank you so much for being involved with that project as well.
Thank you. I'm very excited. I'm just excited to get people answers, something really simplifying nutrition. I think we've
Yeah.
really overcomplicated it, so obviously our goal is just to bring it back to the basics and really teach people how they can heal
Yeah.
and sustain that healing.
Exactly, and I like that framing, that it's really simple and basic. It's like playing a sport. You got to know the fundamentals if you're going to be successful, and I think the fundamentals of nutrition are often not shared. So let's dive right into the book. I you use foxes as your main characters, and I like foxes. I guess I never really met them in a while, so I'm not sure, but they're really cute in your
They're
book.
cute.
But we always talk about, lions, lion diet, and things like that. So I'm curious why you decided to focus on the fox theme in
Sure.
your book.
Yeah. So basically, like how the book came about, I was, I'm a long distance runner. And usually before I run in the morning, I'll, get up, kind of look at the news, things are what's going on. And I saw an article posted that they had just approved medication for children with
Mm,
type 2 diabetes. So children 12 years of age and older. And I was so angry, Dr. Hampton. I'm not anti-medication at all, but I just felt like we have feels like often in the field of medicine, certainly in the field of nutrition, when we have a problem, as
mhm.
opposed to solving that problem, we create another problem. And I'm not a parent. My wife and I are not parents, but we have lots of nieces and nephews. And I just
Right.
I was so mad. I put on my running shoes and I'm like, that's it. I'm writing a children's book. And it's going to be about kids who have type 2 diabetes and how they overcome it. And then as I'm running, I'm thinking like, wow, that's boring. Nobody's going to want to read about kids. And I ran right by a sign. There was a woman in our town who was running for mayor, and her name
Mhm.
is Sarah Fox.
Mm.
And I said,
Oh,
oh, Fox, like Foxabetes, Foxatition. I'm like, hey, that's kind of interesting. That's got a good ring to
that's
it.
crazy.
And because, once again, I really wanted the message of the book, is obviously for kids, but, the kind of I wanted to be like a Disney movie, and that it has kind of a bigger, greater theme to it.
Mhm, mhm.
And so by using foxes too, we were able to use a lot of kind of fun alliteration, the
Mhm.
foxatition, foxabetes, the foxpital.
Right.
And as I was looking for illustrators, I, found one woman who was just able to illustrate some foxes, and they were really fun. So we just kind of went for it and ran with it.
I love that, and, I'm just happy, to be honest, Michelle, that um, you reminded me of how much work we have to do, and a lot of times in the low carb community, even as we're on a low carb cruise, and I see, Dr. Ben Bickman and his family, beautiful. I think he has 4 kids, right? And and although they're on that low carb cruise, it's more likely that they're enjoying the cruise and not necessarily the conferences, right?
Mhm.
So it was nice to know that now we have something that can reach the children. And I'm not sure that we do enough of that in the low carb community. So so it sounds like you're not a parent, but you're an aunt and things like that. So you really talk a little bit more about why you think it's so important that our babies hear this message.
Yeah, I feel like I've had the privilege to witness. I'm the youngest of four, so I have three older sisters. My wife has a brother and a sister, And so being able to witness how different parents raise children,
Mm,
and one of the biggest themes that I would always take away is, like you were stating at the very beginning of this podcast, just how
mm,
crucial it is to set that culture early and to lead by example, and just how influenced kids are by the things they see on TV, by what they read. I remember being a young kid, you watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and, you want pizza, you want what they're
right.
doing. And so by teaching kids like these basic concepts and getting them excited about foods that are really going to support their, metabolism, support their growth, I feel like that's a step in the right direction, because the earlier we can set the culture, like, hey, in this house, we, certainly you don't have to be like uber low carb necessarily for a child, but we prioritize protein. We don't have
Right.
junk food in this house. It's just kind of like setting the culture. And so I think seeing more of those images is really important, because unfortunately we know as soon as kids step outside the house, it's the opposite. Our modern food
Right.
environment is just full of junk food.
Right. And I think we normalize junk food. I remember even when we started our journey, and I remember having a conversation with my wife Karan about the kids' lunch, right? And it was kind of expected that they would have a juice box, right? It was expected that they would have chips. And for some reason in our heads, that was okay for them and
Mhm.
it wasn't okay for us. So we just normalized junk food for our babies because we don't want them to feel alienated when they're in school, when the other kids may not have those things. So there's many reasons for it, but I think it's kind of a cultural thing. And I think it's important that we start to look at our kids like us, right? And when I think about you, I know for those who have not heard the previous interview we did, so make sure we'll make sure to have a link to that. But we know that you, as a young person, suffered from anorexia. And when I think about that, I'm just wondering, if there was another Michelle Hearn who wrote a book like this when you were young, imagine what your life would be like. What impact do you think this book would have had on you if you were just a child reading it, suffering from a condition like anorexia?
Yeah, um, I think anything you can read that encourages, when you're suffering with anorexia, I was afraid of fat. I thought fat was bad.
Mhm.
I thought meat was bad. I thought all these foods were just bad for you. So seeing something where those foods are celebrated and they're
Mm,
part of a family and they help people get better and grow, and it's exciting. It
mm,
makes you question, like, oh wait, this is different. And certainly it would have been very helpful, if I grew up in a family where those foods were prioritized and celebrated, as opposed to, restricted, because, I grew up in a family that, oh, you can't have those are bad for you.
right. That's fair. It's funny, actually. Before the recording, I was on LinkedIn. I had just made a video short, and it basically said that the real, like, superfood was red meat. It was meat instead of like kale or plant based, right? And so somebody put in the comments, but I don't like red meat, right? And then I responded saying, well, animal protein in general is going to be more bioavailable, won't have the anti-nutrients and things like that in it. So it just reminded me how important it is that we, you know, share principles that will remove fear, because there's so much, and that's what I hope the American, the Diabetes Society will do, and that we will give people permission to eat things that they're being told elsewhere will harm them, right? So I just think that's so important. And a lot of this just speaks to how we think, right? And even the diagnosis anorexia is really a disease of the mind. And from our previous conversations, I learned that your mom also suffered from a mental condition, which was bipolar, which um and she kind of suffered in silence when I've heard you talk to others about it also. So many people have no idea what it's like to live with someone who's suffering from somebody from a disease like that. So have you ever imagined what your life would be, what your mom's life would be like if she knew about low carb, rather at a young age, which is what your book's trying to do, or at any age? How, when you reflect on that, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be so different. We have such good evidence now, especially with the recent pilot study on bipolar disorder and ketogenic diets, just
Mhm.
that people with certain mental disorders, whether that's bipolar disorder, major depression, schizophrenia, are doing really well when they
Yeah,
eat low carb. And, the hypothesis being that the ketones just cross the blood brain barrier very easily and
right.
allows their brains to function. And we have similar, that's similar with eating disorders. Like the people with eating disorders just may not metabolize glucose very well in the brain. I mean, you combine that fact with the fact that they're fed the standard American diet, which is just loaded with sugars and carbohydrates.
Mm,
So now you can't process them very well. You have anxieties through the roof and you're riding this blood sugar roller coaster. And so we basically, my mom as well as myself were really set up to fail.
mhm,
And so, I think how many years did she waste? And obviously I know she was doing the best she can. She was
mhm.
often medicated and sometimes not medicated, but it's yeah, it makes me it's kind of a double edge, right? Because you feel angry,
Right,
like, "Why didn't we know this?" But then you feel
right.
hopeful for the future because it's like, "Wow, this is gonna prevent so much suffering for, our future generations."
Yeah, and I understand, that anger when I'm talking to my family or to patients. Oftentimes, we have to focus on the big glass in the front of the car and not the rearview mirror. Like, we wanna learn from our past. We don't wanna live in it, but, um, there will be things we'll discover tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, 10 years from now, which will be, wow, how enlightening that is.
Mhm.
And we could forever imagine, man, if we had only known that, right? So, but I think that we have enough good stuff out here now. Rather, it's the technology. And I'm sure one day, and we joked a little bit about AI before we started, there will come a time when that'll be like just the norm, and people can't imagine not having it, right?
Probably,
Um, this is insane. So we have a so things will always evolve, knowledge will always change, and I just think as long as we're learning from the past and not focused on it, I think we'll be fine. I just think we have so much good news to share. And I guess part of what I want to do briefly is share more good news. We just touched on mental health, and some people who follow this podcast know that eating this way is helpful. But what other medical conditions would you like to throw on the table as things that will benefit that the Fox family, with all the things they were
yeah.
suffering from in the book, right? So
Yeah.
what other conditions come to mind?
Yeah, the Fox family, certainly little Freddie Fox gets type 2 foxabetes. So type 2 diabetes is certainly one thing that has, we have very powerful studies on just how quickly we can, lower insulin and increase insulin sensitivity by lowering your carbohydrates. Also, we talked about anxiety. Anxiety
Mhm,
is a condition that seems like it's increasing exponentially, especially among our young people. So that is something that, once again, obviously stabilizing your blood glucose, potentially fueling your brain off ketones.
mhm,
And even, I don't think a lot of times people really think about like aches and pains. Like it's like, oh, I'm
mhm.
getting older, I'm going to have aches and pains. But, we're even seeing aches in our young 12-year-olds with like elbow problems, knee problems. So by removing a lot of that processed food and really like prioritizing, like you said, those animal proteins,
That's
we're not
right.
only removing things that are inflaming them, we're providing things that kind of push the inflammation down.
No doubt. Who knew that, I'll make sure to say more than just a steak, but who knew that, you know, meat, red meat, chicken, fish, all of these things have, the healing potential. The bear who eats salmon gets all the essential nutrients from that salmon and will keep that big, huge animal healthy. Is a beautiful, statement. Unfortunately, Winnie the Pooh has a big stomach for a reason, right?
Because he's
So
eating all
we
the honey
he's
all the
eating a little too much honey. It's
time.
okay to have honey sometime, I guess, but yeah, but I think that he probably overdoes it a little bit. So let's do a spoiler alert for the podcast and the book. Most of the readers will be young folks, so they're probably not listening to this. So we really won't spoil anything. But for the adults who are like, should I bother giving my kids this book? And let me just say this first. The answer to that question is yes, because you're not going to find resources that speak to children in their language, that speak to the wonders of metabolic health that can be achieved through this approach. And we could spend multiple podcasts talking about the various benefits. In fact, when I speak at the Symposium for Metabolic Health in San Diego in August, I'm going to walk through some of the conditions we don't think about, something like COPD. There's science to support this dietary pattern for so many conditions that are not thought of in a typical setting. But for the parent who's on the fence, I don't know this Michelle Hearn like that. That's what they would say to me. I would say, well, just briefly summarize the story told so that they'll get a sense of what they'll be putting in front of their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the book opens up with the fox family, and they're just doing what foxes do. They're perfectly happy. They're hunting, they're fishing, they're foraging, hanging out in the forest, just living their best fox life. And then a fox from the city comes in. His name is Foolery. And he's obviously representing, the big food and the pharmaceutical industry. He's this very handsome fox. He's the strongest fox they've ever seen. He's very muscular. And he has this promise to the fox family, to all the forest creatures. He says, come follow me. Come to this city. You don't need to hunt and fish. What are you doing? Wasting your time running around? Come work for me. Work in the Feel Good Foods factory. It's the best food you've ever had. You're going to it's easy. And so it's showing this message. This is the hope that, because kids are going to hear this, children, teenagers, young adults. If you hear something where people tell you, oh, it's easy, follow me, do this. Nothing in life is easy. I mean, that should throw a red flag up for you, right? But the Fox family, they just say, all right, cool, let's do it. And so they go work for him in the Feel Good Foods factory. And he has all these promises. Oh, you're going to be strong like me. You're going to feel great. And it's not long until they feel like, man, we don't feel well. They're tired. They're achy. And little Freddie is the young child, or the young fox, ends up passing out. And he finds out he has type 2 foxabetes. So, and he goes to the foxpital, sees the foxitician, who surprisingly is not super helpful, gives the traditional dietitian advice, which is to continue to eat the feel-good foods every few hours and dose with medication. And, it's also my opinion that often, and even in our, especially in our American culture, that we kind of discount some of our elders. So I wanted the one of the heroes of the story to be the grandfather. The grandfather says, like, hey, Fox family, this is ridiculous. Like, we've stopped eating, we've stopped hunting and fishing, and we're all sick. But they keep coming back to, but what about Foolery? What about Foolery? He's so healthy. And so the grandpa and, Freddie decide, like, we got to figure this out. We're going to follow him. Is he really actually eating this food?
Right.
And so it's kind of like pulling the curtains back to show, like Oz, like, oh my gosh, he's not even eating the food. He has a farm. He's eating farm fresh food, and he's working out. No wonder he's healthy. So, and it's a difficult lesson for kids. Freddie is very upset at the end of the book. He's crying. He says he's a liar. He's lying to us in order to make money. He doesn't mind that we're all sick. And so it's kind of that lesson, like, hey, we are going to, as a family, we're going to commit to eating these foods that we've been eating that made us healthy. And we're going to spread the word. We're not going to fall into this propaganda and nonsense. And then it has a page at the very end that has just like some of Freddie's favorite foods, which I'm glad my sister-in-law actually recommended I do that. And I've actually had a few people tell me, like, oh, my son likes that page,
That's cool.
like, Freddie likes this. I want to eat this. So that's kind of fun. But But yeah, it was, it was a really fun book to write. It's well illustrated, really colorful. But once again, just trying to put a situation that, like a
Mhm.
life situation, right? Like you're
That's
gonna
right.
get exposed to propaganda that just seems really good. But if it takes you away from what your your species specific diet is, it's not gonna end well.
That's right. Well, if you do you have a copy of the book nearby for those who are
Yes.
checking us out on
Absolutely.
YouTube? All right. So,
Here we go.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. Bring it a little closer to you,
Can you
to
see?
your
Okay.
body. Yeah,
There
there
we
you
go.
go. So we have it. So we got a little bit of that. So thank you. Beautifully illustrated. It was definitely something that my eyes was happy to look at as I
Thank
read
you.
through it, and I really appreciate you. You're doing a really good job of making it appealing to the young folk, and just telling a fun story that was done in a way where, again, in life you face struggle, but we overcome it with knowledge, and sometimes we need to hear from a wise person to provide perspective. But we trust but verify, and that's what I love about the elder is that he said, "Listen, this is what I think, but let's investigate. Let's do a Nina Teicholz. Let's do
Yes.
a Gary Taubes, and we're going to investigate and see what's going on." So I really appreciate that. And thank you for increasing my vocabulary. Type 2 Foxabidi. So all of those words in the book expanded my vocabulary. So I appreciate that as well. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the foolery character, it reminds us that who you hang with matters. And when I was getting my obesity training, one of the things I learned was that your chances of becoming obese was really more associated with your friends than it was with any other group. You would think it would be your parents, your spouse, your siblings, but it was actually your friends who whose behaviors and approaches to lifestyle impacted your lifestyle the most. So who you hang with matters. Again, what I taught my kids, if we can't grow together, we can't chill together. So we really were particular about making sure they were around the right kind of folk, and we would often bring kids to our home so that we would have a sense of their safety and make sure everything was okay. Um, so when you thought about the book and just in general, how important is it that we make sure our babies are hanging with the right kind of folk, are associated with the right kind of folk? How much does that impact their ability to achieve their goals?
Oh, I mean, who you surround yourself with, like I think you stated it just really well, is everything. There's a saying that you're the accumulation of the five people you spend the most time with, you know.
Mhm,
That is interesting. It's more friends than even family and spouses.
mhm,
But I could see, when you're with your friends, especially at a very young age, you
mhm,
want to be cool and there's all this peer pressure. And
mhm,
so, I've seen with like, I think about my niece and nephew who are very involved in soccer. Like they are club soccer every day. Well, the people they're around are playing a lot of soccer. So guess what? They're spending time with people that are active and that have to make good choices because they're going to bed early, they're getting up early. Even their nutrition to some
mhm.
degree is very focused on that. Where unfortunately, I think of another niece that I have that potentially hangs out with some less than healthy humans. And
That's right.
because of that, it's like, well, we're going to go to Starbucks and get frappuccinos and we're going to go
Right.
get. And so would her life be different if she was like, oh, well, me
Mhm.
and my friends are all going to work out? You tend to do what your friends like to do.
That's right.
You tend to kind of fall in line. And that's why ideally you develop some type of habits, whether it's a sport or it's whether band or something else. And then you surround yourself with people that not only like what you're doing, but also employ really good habits.
That's
Because if
right.
not, it can go down a very
Ooh,
dangerous path,
a serious
even
path.
outside of nutrition.
Yes, watching the series This Is Us on Netflix, me and my wife have been watching, and there was a previous episode where one of the main characters decided to not go to school. And it was more of a potential boyfriend kind of thing. But you start skipping school, And once you do it once and get away with it, you may skip again. And so now you have a habit that was influenced by your friend. And maybe during that time when you're skipping school, you see Oberweis. And although Oberweis seems to be kind of shutting down, that beautiful ice cream place in the US, at least locally, it seems to be shutting down. Um, you may be eating foods that you wouldn't have eaten because your peers are like, "Hey, let's go get some ice cream," and and beyond just the peer pressure, ice cream tastes pretty good. So it's not that you're just trying to be strong. It's like, well, it does taste pretty good, and then you start doing things that maybe are not serving you. So I just think if you're around the right people, it really influences your or impacts your success. And I just want to make sure, not just for our babies, but for adults, they need to be thoughtful about that as well. I think there may be some parents who may look at their kids and say, "They're kids. You guys are killing me with this stuff. It's not that serious. Kids are not unhealthy. Kids don't have metabolic diseases." So if a parent came to you and said to you, "Hey, this is you're doing too much, doc," uh, I know you're a nutritional professional and that's your thing, but let the kids be kids. Are there metabolic things that kids need to think about?
Yeah, well, I would first of all say that the youngest person I saw was a young boy that was 8 that had type 2 diabetes. And
Crazy.
so, yes,
That's
unfortunately,
crazy.
and I hear this a lot, like, "Well, when I was a kid," and I can't speak to that if somebody's 50, 60, 70. I'm glad that our food culture was better when you were a kid. Maybe if
Right.
I don't know if it's because we have all the chemicals or foods are more processed, and we certainly know our modern food environment today is now set up where we're just exposed to so
Mhm.
much food and sugar all day, every day. And certainly you could say we also have a lack of activity, but it's not good right now. And so it like anything else, and you could probably speak to this too, once I've sat with so many people, and I'm not talking 80s, 90s, I'm talking 40s, 50s that
Mhm.
have to have amputations or that have heart failure. And family will come to me and say, "Tell us what to do. We'll do anything." And
Mhm.
my response is, "You're 30 years too late. Like, we needed to do this when you were much, much
Right.
younger. We needed to
Yeah.
address these things." And this is certainly not like saying, like, "Oh my God, a child can never have ice cream." But what has
Mhm.
happened is that that has become the norm
That's right.
versus what we used to do on a very rare special
That's right.
occasion.
That's
If
right.
you environment impacts what we eat so much. And so if you set up your environment where your kids are eating whole foods most of the time, you're going to be so much more likely to raise a physically and mentally healthy child. Like, to me, that's everything.
Yeah, and also that, the and I have seen plenty of people in their 40s and 50s having heart attacks and strokes, and it's devastating. So I agree with you that that's, like, a big part of it. Like, these things can happen, but you're right, they start when they're younger. And another thing that, parents may say to you is, "Well, everybody in my family gets diabetes. Everybody in my family are obese. Everybody gets high blood pressure. So I hear you, doc, but we have bad genes, and I think that my kid is destined for this." So for those parents who may say, "This book can't help my family because this is our destiny," what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, we know that, your genes obviously are going to influence how you grow and develop. But it's never an absolute, right? Meaning
Mhm,
that if you, like, everybody in your family is obese or has heart disease or type 2 diabetes, you are certainly more likely to have that than
mhm,
just the average person who doesn't have a family history of that. That's why anytime you go into a medical or nutritional consultation, they ask you these things on questionnaires, right?
mhm.
But what that means, I mean, if anything, that means that you need to be a little bit more aware than the average person. It's kind of like anxiety disorders run in my family, right? Bipolar disorder, certainly I had an eating disorder. But that doesn't mean, like, my sisters who have kids, that doesn't mean they're destined for that. But that means they're going to be very aware and very
Mhm.
careful. And for them, they understand how powerful nutrition is in mental health. And so, if your whole family has type 2 diabetes, like, that probably means that you may be you may be susceptible to like hyperinsulinemia. You need to keep your carbs low. Your life will be
Right.
much better. To where
That's right.
somebody who doesn't have that, they may not necessarily need that. So saying like, okay, I mean, if anything, if you have a history, you almost need to be a little bit extra cognizant of how you go
That's
through
right.
your life.
That's right. And it's likely that the family members who still suffer from type 2 diabetes have not adopted a low carb diet. Um, so it's more likely that if they had done that, that they probably wouldn't have type 2 diabetes. It's a rare patient in front of me who has type 2 diabetes, and I confirmed that by doing a C-peptide or an antibody test for islet cells. I confirmed they don't have type 1, where you definitely may need insulin, and I can't help them reverse that. And it's not magical. You don't have to get on a plane or drive to Chicago to meet Dr. Hampton. You just got to get your carbs down, and therapeutically, I would say less than 20 or 30 carbs a day total, not net. It's a rare person who won't reverse it, and those who are carnivore definitely will have no problem reversing it. So it's really exciting news for people who are out here struggling. And it's not just the patients, it's my clinical colleagues. They're struggling. Sometimes it's the nutrition professionals who are struggling with their weight. I can't
You're being
begin
kind
to,
by saying sometimes,
right.
when I
Yeah, I'm
was,
being,
when I was first starting and I prescribed what I was taught, the
yeah,
standard American diet, consistent carbohydrates. Often patients would have 75 grams 3 times a day and then a 30 to 15 gram snack. And I never, Dr. Hampton, in, 10 years saw anybody reverse their type 2 diabetes. And
no,
since practicing low carbohydrate nutrition, I see it every week.
right.
I
It's
see it all
just
the time.
normal.
Like you said, it's not magical. It's just basically getting your insulin down,
That's
getting those
right.
carbohydrates lower, using some of that muscle glycogen, fueling off ketones. And the reason it's sustainable too is people enjoy. People don't want to eat, grilled chicken and fat-free dressing.
Right, right,
Being
right,
able to
right.
eat a very satiating either
Right.
steak or salmon or chicken thighs with butter, like people enjoy those types of foods. They've just
That's
been
right.
told they can't have them.
That's right. That's
So
right.
yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the greatest gifts of being on a low carb keto or carnivore diet is that absolutely you remove that fear of fat. And if you remove the fear of fat, food's going to taste pretty good. Um, it's not often that I sit in front of my dinner and I'm eating something I really don't want to eat, or I'm just eating it because it's supposed to be good for me, but it's not the best tasting things. And I had to be really creative back in my vegetarian days to make the food appetizing. Now it's like it's so easy. It's really hard to imagine what my life was compared to now. Now, just since you're a nutrition professional, maybe a few words about our children and maybe to the average listener, this is common sense, but if when you're sitting in front of a person who's like amazed by this conversation and they're like, what? I can eat, the egg and the egg yolk, what are basic principles we should share for our parents and our kids about what foods they should avoid in order for them to be healthy?
Yeah, I think you're basically flipping the pyramid upside down, right? Like,
Right.
I really truly believe, I feel like my experience, my research has shown that the basis of human nutrition is animal protein and fat,
Yeah.
and so from there, I do think most people, especially, metabolically healthy kids, which unfortunately, as we're talking about, there are a lot of metabolically unhealthy children. But metabolically healthy children can tolerate some carbohydrates, whether that's
Oh, yeah.
fruits or some vegetables or some whole food starches. But when it comes to these processed foods and these ultra processed foods, it's really a slippery slope. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is, it's literally someone's full time job to design these Doritos and these ice cream and these cakes to prevent you from not being, to prevent you from stopping eating them.
That's
Like
right.
you're literally, and we're giving them to our kids. And often, I've seen in hospitals and in schools, kids are eating those things instead of lunch. Well, instead of lunch, I
Mhm.
get a Coke and a candy bar. There's vending machines in hospitals and schools now. And so really encouraging our kids to focus on, I always say protein first too. If we can do protein forward, that helps fill you up. That helps you be
That's
calm.
right.
That helps stabilize your blood sugar. And then from there, kind of building out your plate. But man, if we could just get the cookies, crackers, sugar,
That's
flour
right.
stuff out, and it's not a popular message. There's so many dietitians and doctors on Instagram and TikTok and everything saying like, oh, eat all these foods. It's so great and fun. And it just blows my mind. I mean, our
Mm,
population is so sick and fat
that's
and
right.
just we have to address metabolism, and you're not going to do that with these ultra processed foods.
No, you won't. And the one of the words you just used was calm. And what parent doesn't want a calm child? A child that's able to, um, calmly sit down and take care of their lesson for the day. Calmly even receive orders from the parent in a way that honors the parent. They don't lose their cool because they are calm, their brain's not racing, and we know what happens when we uh, give them cookies and the crackers. They end up on a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster that they don't really control because that's what the body does with these types of foods. So yeah, let's fill them up on some quality animal protein instead. And they don't suffer when they're eating the air fried chicken that you gave them or the or the ribeyes. And these things, yes, these could be part of their lunch instead of the processed food. So is there a little bit more work? Maybe, but I find that when you cook food using the tools we have these days, including the air fryer, is not a lot of work and it's actually pretty easy and you don't really waste a lot with this approach. And although those metabolically healthy babies can eat fruit, the amount of fruit we used to throw away um, is mind-boggling. I mean, we threw away so much food when we ate a lot of plants because if you don't eat them right away, they spoil. We rarely do that, if ever. With the only time we throw away animal-based foods is if we just made too much or we cooked and then oh, I forgot we're supposed to be going out this night, and next thing you know, it's like days pass, but it's rare.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to also briefly talk about, how we do so much to make sure our kids are okay, and to the extent sometimes we go to the extreme and we overprotect them, rather we give a trophy to the winners and the losers at the game. I mean, not that
Hmm.
that's a bad thing, but
I do
we
too.
we we don't want them to fail at anything, and we consider failing a problem. We consider struggling and working harder to overcome struggle a problem. So, what's your thoughts on why it's important that our babies actually learn a little bit about struggle?
Yeah, I mean, struggle is what teaches you to be resilient, and isn't resilience. You need emotional resilience to
Mhm,
become a healthy young adult and then adult, because as an adult, you're going to have, nobody goes through life unscathed, right? Whether it's a
mhm,
failed relationship, a challenging job, and everyone gets older. You're going to lose parents. You might lose friends. Like life is very difficult. And, I've seen a lot of parents, like you said, in their zeal to be like, oh, I don't want my child to experience any hardship or difficulty. You get these kids that, start college and they're just crushed when they fail a class or when I've said on another podcast recently, when I worked in the second mental health facility I worked at as lead dietitian, I was
mhm,
stunned by how many, you read the chart of obviously every patient you see and the children 18 and under. And, obviously some of them had severe trauma, but some of them it was like they broke up with their boyfriend broke up with them. So they tried to commit suicide. It's like, holy moly, like this is the
I know,
life.
I know.
So by exposing our kids to difficult things, like you need to fail. You need, and
Yeah,
once they fail, I feel like it's the job as the parent. Now, obviously, like I said, I don't have children. I can only speak as like the aunt and this, like watching my nephew go play a soccer game, plays his hearts out, his team loses, cries
mhm,
and say, well, I'm upset, I'm angry. Okay, yeah, that right. Tell me more. Like, let him get it out. Well, what can we do
yeah,
differently? I don't know. Well, why don't you feel this, deal with it for a moment, and then let's practice tonight. Let's kick the ball around. Okay.
that's right.
Knowing that like I'm gonna be okay. Like this is life. Things hurt, things happen.
That's
And
right.
then we figure out how to move forward. Like that's by protecting people from that, we're not protecting them, we're setting them up for just a very, very difficult adult life.
That's right. And if you think about the number of teams in any sport, there's only one champion at the end of the season.
Exactly.
So everybody else has to figure out how to deal with that. And if we live in a world where we don't teach our babies how to deal with it, unless they win a champion, even LeBron James, Michael Jordan, these guys didn't win every year. In fact, Michael lost a ton, and LeBron went to plenty of championships and didn't walk away the champion. So, but you got to be able to get through that and then be able to stand the next day. So I just think that I just wanted to ask that question and get your thoughts on it. And I guess the one other kind of, as we kind of get towards the end of this conversation, hearing different messages about how to think about nutrition is really important, which is why your book is so important, because it may be the first children's book to touch on this topic, unless you have one out there you've heard of, but this is maybe
No,
the
not
first
yet.
one, right? So, and how we think about nutrition, it shapes us into who we become. And our goal with the American Diabetes Society, with YouTube channels, podcasts, being in front of our patients as clinicians, is to give them an option that they may have never heard of that's extremely effective. So when you think about those statements, what comes to your mind in terms of the work you do and the impact you're trying to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it so well. Is I want people to know, because I do feel like so much of the medical industry and the nutrition industry is so disempowering. I
Mhm.
mean, I've talked to people. I had a woman, a client, she's given me permission to share. She said she went 17 years with,
Mm,
she hadn't gone more than 48 hours without binging and purging,
mm,
until she found, we got her on a low carb diet, and now she's over 6 months, binge and purge free. And so, what I want people to know is that this is not hoopla. This is not,
right.
they've had so much, so many people have tried, pills and potions and all, they've put themselves through terrible workouts and starvation. Like, we're teaching you how to work with your physiology.
Mhm.
We are, you and I have no agenda. Ultimately, if someone's eating in a way and they're happy and they're healthy, like, good for them. I do not care
Right.
what you ultimately decide to eat, but I've just seen so much suffering that I want to teach you something that I've seen be very sustainable. That is one of
That's
the
right.
biggest issues in nutrition, like you talked about. Like, you can eat kind of blah food for a while, but you'll burn out.
That's right.
So
That's
something
right.
sustainable, effective, something that works quickly. It's not like, well, do this for 2 years. It's like, hey, you're going to see results. You're going to feel better in weeks. And
Right
then,
away.
so effective, sustainable, and just like you said, people just enjoy doing this. So by having this option, since being in this space, not only obviously I feel very empowered myself, but it's my goal to just empower others.
That's right, and we have, and shout out to that lovely dog.
Yeah,
And,
sorry. He was doing so good.
no, it's all
That's it.
good. So, one thing I wanna, say is, a lot of people I think I've mentioned a few times that the US News and World Report, they tend to be, overall favoring Mediterranean, but they can't deny what's true, and that's why they rank keto as the number one diet for fast weight loss, going back to what you just said. Like, we can guarantee you when it comes to weight loss, that makes the most sense because, again, insulin is the fat storage hormone. If you have a lot of carbs, you're going to raise your insulin. If you do a keto, low carb, carnivore diet, you flatten that insulin down and your body starts to use your fat as fuel. And it's a beautiful place to be. So now, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I've asked you this before, but I'm asking again in terms of how over the next 12 months you hope to protect your nest. I know you are a avid marathon runner. I've never run a marathon, so I'm always jealous when I see you flexing your little abs on those posts. And I really appreciate you bringing exercise to the conversation as well. But over the next 12 months, where do you plan to focus your attention?
Yeah, well, like you said, I have a ultra. I have a 50-mile race in your neck of the woods on the lakefront in Chicago
Oh, really
in
cool.
November 2nd, and
Nice.
I'm pretty excited about that. I'm also just starting writing an outline for what I hope to be a very short third book on anorexia and ketogenic diets, as I just feel like we have a clinical trial going on right now that is wrapping up in the fall, and I'm fortunate to have a little insight on how that's going, and
That's
so
right.
I'm excited for that. And yeah, and other than that, just I'm going to be spending some time with my family. I
That's
have
right.
a trip out to see my parents and then my sister. And, it was a little bit of a rough year at the beginning of the
That's
year for
right.
my wife and I. So definitely, especially around the holidays, we'll be trying to spend a lot of time together.
Well, that's excellent. Shout out to your wife. Let her know I said hi.
Thank you.
And I've never been to a marathon, so maybe that'll be my first. Maybe I'll get a chance to see you
I'll be there
in
for
that.
a while. Yeah,
Yeah, so
we'll
that'll
have
be
to connect
awesome.
before. I'd love for you to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely gonna look into that possibility. I'm really excited about that. So just looking forward to continuing this journey. Uh, if we're right, we'll be here for a while to share this story of healing and reach more people, and then hopefully, like a butterfly, they'll spread their wings and spread it even more. So let's share with the audience how they can get a hold of not only um, your first book, the second book, which is The Fox. And by the way, you won't believe this. The 2 nights ago, I was thinking about you and I was like, who better to write a book about anorexia? I
Hmm.
promise you, I was just thinking that.
I've had
So
there's been too many weird coincidences that have convinced
that
me
is
this is my next step.
crazy. Yeah. So I think that's your destiny. And I'm really happy you're going to touch on that topic in the context of low carb. So how can people find you?
Yeah, so my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. I've got resources. You can get the book through there. Also, the Fox Family Food Fight, as well as the Dietitian's Dilemma, is on Amazon. The Dietitian's Dilemma has an Audible, as well as a ebook. And then Instagram, I am at Run Eat Meat Repeat. At
Yes.
Twitter, Michelle Hearn RD. And yeah, I do consults. If anybody's interested in doing like a one-on-one consult, just I say contact me through my website or social media and I'll get back to you.
Absolutely. Run, eat, meet, repeat. You can't beat that. So we're going to eat the right food and we're going to exercise. So
Yes.
I really appreciate you. I adore the work you're doing. Looking forward to collaborating with the American Diabetes Society. And I think we have a lot of work to do there as well. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Michelle.
Oh, thank you so much again.
Thank you. And as we conclude, guys, as parents, it's crucial that we educate our children about the impact of their food choices on their overall health. It's so important. We need to instill the principles that the low carb diet can actually lead to a healthy, long life. And we want to make sure they hear that message. And again, it's not the only diet, but they need to know that that's one diet they should consider. Why? Because it helps you regulate your blood sugars, you reduce insulin resistance. And for those who need to lose a few pounds, you lose weight, among a list of other metabolic benefits. I know for me personally, my ability to focus and concentrate, my energy levels, and just my overall mood is so amazing. Wouldn't you want that for your children? Teaching our children that these are the benefits and it will empower them so that as they move forward, they'll be able to live the life we would want for them. So we live in a world where processed foods and sugary snacks are too common. They are the standard. It's more important, however, that we educate them that there's another way. There's another way to eat. There's another way to feel and another way to live. So I really thank you guys for coming to this episode. If you have a young person in your life who would benefit from Michelle and her book, I would absolutely, gift them that book. I think they'll be happy when they get it. I certainly have enjoyed it myself. and have shared it with a few young people in my life as well. So I really appreciate you coming to this episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast. And until the next episode, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.